All right, so let's go over where we left off on Monday. Right, so we had created a Node.js server, right, using Express to create several RESTful endpoints. We had connected to a Mongo database, this particular database, right, using the mongoose library. We had installed the body parser library to parse JSON from our body, and we had configured cores, right, so that we can receive HTTP requests from JavaScript that are running in a different domain. We then configured several controllers that allowed us to retrieve data from the database, right, from retrieving quizzes and retrieving questions. And if we go to each one of the controllers, we worked on reformatting them, right? We refactoring them so that now they are written in terms of these services that used to be synchronous, but now instead they are asynchronous, right? They're now calling these functions, and these functions used to return arrays, and instead now they return promises that allows us to register for the callback, and they provide the data in that function callback. And then we can use a response to return the data to the client. The implementation of each one of these was written in terms of these DAOs. DAOs, as you know, they are encapsulated modules that provide a high-level API to the data layer. Right? So, for instance, here we have final quizzes, find quiz by ID. These are all implemented in the DAO, but they're all written in terms of the low-level mongoose models, right, that provide these very generic functions that allow us to talk to the underlying database. And the role of the DAO is to wrap these low-level generic functions into a high-level domain-specific API that can then be exposed to the rest of the application. And then the model was just implemented in terms of just the schema that they represent, and we saw that the schema for the quizzes, was a simple title, but more interestingly was that a quiz was made up of a collection of or an array of questions. Now, for these questions, really the only thing that we were storing for these questions was the ID of the question, but we can configure mongoose, right, to use the ID that we're storing in the database, to be able to do somewhat of a what's called like a join, right? That this can be treated as a foreign key that is referencing records in another collection to go fetch that data for us, right? And we configure it by providing a reference telling, these are the instances of the objects that I want you to bring back, those IDs, right? And Mongoose knows that this key for the name of the model, refers to a schema, refers to a collection, refers to that represents the questions, right? Now the questions had their own controller, right? That use their own services, that use their own DAOs, right? That then use their own model, right? And then here's where we define the model for the question that is being referenced by the quiz, right? The quiz schema, see that? Quiz schema has a primary key that is referencing to a question. Actually, it has a whole bunch of them, arrays of these questions, which is basically referencing this model. And this model, in this model, this key, this unique identifier, allows it to know, what schema is it related to, and what collection is the data stored, so that it can go and it can go into the database and fetch those records that are being referenced by the quiz. For the question schema, we took a look at how to use some very useful constraints that we can add additional rules to the fields that we are storing. Up to this point, we had just used a data type constraint saying that things need to be either a number or a string, a date, whatnot, but providing a configuration object instead of just the plain data type. We can not only provide what the data type is, but we can, in addition to that, we can specify default values. Right? If you don't provide the value for that field, I give you the value. Or we can specify that these strings need to be of a particular value, right? That this string is not any string. It can only be true, false, multiple choice. There needs to be an essay question, right? What else do we have? True, false, multiple choice. Fill in the blanks, fill blanks, or whatever token it is useful to you. So we have questions. We are also using arrays of strings to represent the various options. If this were a multiple choice question, then the options would be stored there. Okay, so that's pretty much where we left off on Monday. So let's go on a little further beyond what we have so far. Any questions from where we are at this point?